Live from our nation's capital, it's Friday, the 15th of May, the year of our Lord 2020, on the John Fredericks Radio Network on FM 99.1, 103.9 in Chicago, streaming live to you on americasvoice.news out of Colorado, Dish Channel 219. That is the streaming service for the Trump Revolution. Immediately after the show today at 12 noon, they will be going live to the Rose Garden for President Trump's press briefing. And then later at 2 o'clock with Kayleigh McEnany, who's the new press secretary, who's going to have a press briefing also. Also, Newsmax TV and 70 Million Homes under Chris Ruddy and the great leadership of the Newsmax team. Worldwide on nexus.org, IRRS. And later in the day, subtitled in Mandarin and blown through the firewall on G News, G Media, so that our friends in Beijing don't have to take the time to kind of translate it. By the way, tomorrow, another special. Descent into Hell, I think it's part 5 we're on now. Descent into Hell part 5. It's going to be voices of people, of Chinese citizens from the mainland talking about what life is behind the firewall. You don't want to miss this. We've been prepping this all week. It's going to be quite extraordinary. We're also going to have a couple of American voices talking to you about what American companies, what American capitalists, what American financiers and government officials are working to leave that firewall up. Huge tectonic plate shift over the last 24 hours. Now a whole of government, whole of industry engagement worldwide in this great conflict with the Chinese Communist Party. We're going to go from Sydney, Australia, to London, England, to France. We got Front National. We got Jerome Riviere from the European Parliament. We've got Alan Mendoza, the chairman of the executive director of the Henry Jackson Society. And we want to start with Sharri Markson. We had Sharri on the other day from the Daily Telegraph in Australia. She joins us today from Sydney. Next up is going to be Bill Gertz with a follow-on story from her. She broke a story the other day about the PLA's direct involvement in this whole research operation. And as you know, this is going to get to be a driving part of the narrative in holding the Chinese Communist Party accountable for what happened, but also to make sure it can't happen in the future. Bill Gertz has got breaking news from the U.S. government from sources talking about the bioweapons program of the PLA. And I want to start with Sharri Markson. Sharri, thank you very much for joining us. I realize it's late at night in Sydney. Thank you very much for joining us.
No, thank you so much, Steve, for having me on again.
You're one of the top investigative reporters in the world, and particularly on this topic. Talk to us about what you found out about I think people are pretty stunned here when we put your article up on our site to know that they're kind of thinking, hey, we thought World Health Organization, NIH, you got these nice Chinese scientists, they're working with Tony Fauci, they're working with the Australian NIH, and you kind of break this story that it's actually the People's Liberation Army has got their hand in this. Can you walk our audience through, we got a little more time today, exactly what you found out?
Yeah, it really is quite extraordinary. And just to start off with, there is absolutely nothing wrong. In fact, it's really crucial for scientists around the world to be collaborating, particularly in trying to find a vaccine for the coronavirus. But this is not that. So this is a study that was published in Nature in March this year, and it was pitched by the University of Sydney in Australia as helping to solve the puzzle of the animal to human transmission of the coronavirus. And it was looking at whether pangolins, a mammal called pangolins, I'd never heard of them before doing research into this, could have been an intermediary host between bats, where the virus is believed to have started, COVID-19 is believed to have started, and humans. Now, when you drill down into the study, in very fine print at the very end of the research paper, it has this acknowledgement. I'm going to read it to you. It says, "We thank Professor Wu Chan Kao and their team in the State Key Laboratory of Pathogen and Biosecurity, Institute of Microbiology and Epidemiology, Beijing, for their substantial contributions to this study, including coordinating among research parties, conducting virus isolation, something called qPCR, you'll have to ask a scientist about that, and sequencing, genetic sequencing." Now, that laboratory, I found out through my work, is a laboratory that's run by the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, and their Academy of Military Sciences. So the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese military, did the genetic sequencing and virus isolation that underpinned a crucial piece of research into the origins of the coronavirus and whether it was transmitted from animals to humans that has ended up in one of the most esteemed medical journals in the world called Nature, with no acknowledgement that the PLA was involved. And this study, Steve, is now being mentioned in numerous Chinese government press releases as supporting their line that of course may be correct. We don't know yet that it likely came from the wet market.
Now, Australia, did the Australia NIH have any participation in this? And I know you contacted them as of the other day, but they hadn't gotten back to you. Is there any update on that? Is somehow the Australian NIH, which seems, as everything we read, our NIH and Australian NIH somehow has relationships with these P4 labs and maybe now even with the PLA lab that hasn't really either been disclosed or not sharply enough highlighted that people can kind of understand what's going on here?
So this study was co-funded by the Australian government and the Chinese government. Most of the funding, probably about 75 to 80% of it, was from various Chinese government universities. And then there was one grant from the Australian government, the official Australian government, Australian Research Council, that gives the scientific grants. And the only Western researcher, the only non-China based, is how the study puts it, non-China based academic or scientist on this paper was from the University of Sydney. His name is Edward Holmes. And your avid listeners who've been following the coronavirus might recognize his name because he was also the only Western scientist who was part of the team that first uploaded the genome sequence of the coronavirus to worldwide databases.
Is it kind of, I guess they're going to argue it's in our bio, security program and biodefense, and Bill Gertz is going to be on next to actually go through. There's been a big leak in the U.S. government to Gertz of the Washington Times, talk about their bioweapons program. But would citizens of Australia kind of ask the question of, hey, what is one of our most esteemed virologists or immunologists working with actually a lab that's run by the PLA, and particularly on something on genetic sequencing? Would that be something that you might have to have the Minister of Defense of Australia sign off on first?
I mean, absolutely. This should be happening. There should be more oversight on this. And we've put this story, it is an important story. This is, I can't stress it enough. It's just mind-boggling that there's PLA genetic sequencing and virus isolation underpinning research into the coronavirus. It is a clear conflict of interest. As we said in our front page story on the Daily Telegraph, clear conflict of interest. It is, there's clearly the potential for this to be compromised. We need this research to be completely independent, given we've seen how much China has lied in terms of the outbreak of this coronavirus. So we've had, since my story's broken and other similar stories that I've been writing about, with our politicians, some of them have been calling for more of an oversight body to crack down on this, just to make sure that it's all above board, to examine it, to any national security risks here. But our government has been quite slow in terms of taking this particular issue up. And so I'm doing more investigation into it, and I'm starting to look more at what other military links there are in our universities and in our key research institutions. So there'll be more on this to come. But it's a worldwide problem. And in the US, you've had people arrested for their links to what's called the 1,000 Talent Program as well. And I'm sure you know all about that. There's been scientists in Canada who've been arrested literally as they were trying to get to the airport to leave the country with virus samples. This was just at the end of last year. So, right around the world, this is a big issue. You've got to be careful because there are amazing, brilliant, hardworking Chinese scientists who have nothing to do with the military and whose work is not compromised. But of course, the scientific and research sector is one of the key areas where there is concern about foreign interference. So oversight is really important here.
I just want to make sure before we let you go, Sharri, that the researcher on the paper in the Australian scientific community, they have not gotten back to you yet with a clear explanation of this. I want to make sure we're clear that we're not shortchanging those people. They have not gotten back to you.
No, they have. They've got it's on the University of Sydney's Twitter account, on their website. They've got a big statement they've put out But in that statement, they just defend international collaboration. They do not explain why it's appropriate for a People's Liberation Army laboratory to be conducting the genetic sequencing and virus isolation. But no, they've got a big statement out there defending the international collaboration, which of course no one is arguing against. And they also make the point that their scientist, Edward Holmes, only received funding himself from the Australian government. He didn't receive money or any funding from the Chinese government. The Chinese government funded their own scientists. So that's what they've also pointed out in that statement. But no apology, no explanation, nothing for why they haven't disclosed the fact that the PLA lab did this work. And, you just have to look at the most recent statements that Chinese embassies around the world are putting out. And there's a fascinating statement that the Chinese embassy in Auckland put out. And, your listeners and viewers can Google that. And they just mentioned so many scientific studies that they've been producing into the coronavirus. So you just wonder how much of this has been independently reviewed. And, this study in Nature that I've been speaking about, that was peer reviewed, but, none of them would have known that this laboratory was a PLA lab.
Sharri, how do people get to your Twitter account? How do they start to follow you on online?
Thank you, Steve. It's Sharri Markson, at Sharri Markson, SharriMarkson. And again, I said this last time I was on your show, and so you've got so many listeners in Australia, Steve, which is great to see. But if anyone has any good tips for me to follow up and investigate, please contact me, because we're reporting on this every day here in Australia. It's such an important topic, and there needs to be a worldwide bipartisan inquiry to get how this happened.
Sharri, thank you so much. We'll get the story up in the updates and all that. I want to thank Sharri Markson joining us late at night from Sydney, Australia. This shows you the arrogance. This gets back to Fauci and these NIH guys and the CDC. You saw it yesterday with Dr. Bright, and I think Dr. Bright has done some tremendous work. He's obviously a very qualified guy. But they come in with kind of this chip on their shoulder. And this is why I want to start with the story. We got Gertz with explosive details later. Knowing that the intelligence community and the Five Eyes community in Australia, because they're one of the major parts of the Canadian, New Zealand, United Kingdom, United States, Five Eyes kind of joint effort, which is going to come up on the Obamagate stuff, right? The Five Eyes program. Australian intelligence knows it. How does this guy working with the PLA not fully disclose? And when she outs him, the arrogance is like, hey, we're about international collaboration. You're a bunch of nationalists. You're a bunch of racists. You're a bunch of nativists. You're a bunch of xenophobes. They go right back to the same parlor trick, right? She breaks a huge story, and they won't even come up and say, hey, yes, maybe we need to have some, maybe we should have checked in with the Department of Defense in Australia. Maybe we should have checked in with the intelligence community in Australia. Maybe we should have seen what the genetic sequencing at the Beijing lab run by the People's Liberation Army. You got a couple of colonels on this paper. What exactly are they doing, and how are you helping them with Australian taxpayers' money? And you see this in the U.S.
Well, the first thing you said really struck me, the arrogance of it. We are watching the arrogance of these scientific experts on display across the world. And to highlight it, Lancet, a well-respected scientific journal today, just wrote essentially an op-ed saying that Donald Trump needs to be replaced.
This is following on Bolsonaro's got replaced yesterday. Lance, we want evidence-based, science-based database. Be back with Bill Gertz in a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the signal from the noise. Remember, the signal from the noise. And we love our compatriots and all the grassroots folks that are getting up and very angry about this, the shutdown still staying up and everything like that. But that is the noise. The signal is what's happening between the Chinese Communist Party in the United States. Because the only way we're going to get out of here is bring all those manufacturing jobs back to the United States of America. High value added manufacturing jobs. Something that we have shipped over there for the last 30 years and talked about for the last couple of years until President Trump arrived, and now we're going to force the issue, and you see this happening across the board. It's one of the reasons the stock market's down today. The discussion in the Commerce Department, they're stopping Huawei. You've got now Lawrence Summers in the Financial Times, my favorite paper. His lead story is that the pandemic is going to lead the pivot to the Asian century, and he's not talking there about the U.S. as a Pacific power and the United Kingdom in the U.S. and the other industrial democracies of the West in partnership with India and Japan being the dominant force. No, they're talking about China running the deal, which is what the Chinese want. We're going to get into all that during the...
I just skim-read that, by the way, in the break when you brought it to my attention. There's a buried lead in there, by the way. It says at the end of the op-ed, for all the Trump administration's manifest failures, the U.S. has not been a particularly poor performer compared to the rest of the West. Tell that to CNN.
Exactly. Thank you, Summers. Lawrence Summers. Okay, we're gonna get Bill Gertz in a second. The reason we're doing the China part, usually we do China in the 11 o'clock hour and more of the domestic situation, the 10 o'clock hour. The reason we wanted to flip it today, and we're going to get to Jason Lewis, who's running for the Senate out in Minnesota. Rosemary Gibson's going to join us because guess what? The President of the United States, it is rumored, it's in CNBC as a breaking story, he's going to sign the Buy American EO today or over the weekend that is going to shift the manufacture of drugs back to the good old United States of America, because Rosemary Gibson has been prophetic and she's been out there banging the drum for the last 90 days, and people are finally listening to her about China RX and how the CCP makes all the drugs, it makes all the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, and the White House and Peter Navarro and others are working on this. We've also got this situation from yesterday with the doctor in the response on I still understand the pandemic plan. We're going to get into all that the next hour, why we're dropping a pandemic plan from January today when we're kind of, we're past all that. We'll get into all those details. I want to bring in Bill Gertz. Bill Gertz from the Washington Times. Bill has been mocked, ridiculed, dismissed, shouted down for years and years and years. Bill Gertz has been in the wilderness as the top investigative reporter on everything related to the Chinese Communist Party. And if you go back and look at his books, Deceiving the Sky is a must-read. He's got a new monograph out about how the CCP, how China made you sick with this pandemic. He is a cutting-edge reporter, and he's got another bombshell story. Reason we wanted him back-to-back with Sharri Markson in Australia, who reported, hey, the government's kind of financing the PLA's, genetic sequencing experiments, and Nature's publishing it in the small print at the bottom. Oh, by the way, this was done in coordination with and led by the People's Liberation Army. And they're so arrogant, Bill, when she confronts them, they put out a statement that says, hey, it's international cooperation, and where's Greta Thunberg, and, we're all going to have a group hug while they're building bioweapons in these labs unsupervised. You want another biological Chernobyl? Ladies and gentlemen, it's coming. It's coming because of the arrogance of the scientific community, and we're CNN and MSNBC. Remember, we're the most data-driven, evidence-driven, science-driven. We love that. We want more of it. We want more intense, but we also want fiduciary responsibility. Fauci and this crowd, these international scientists, are reckless. This is beyond gross negligence. This is reckless. And if you know anything about transactions, when you get to the level of reckless, that means they're totally out of control. So, Bill, walk us through your breaking story in the Washington Times about the bioweapons program of the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, this is a huge story, and it's huge because it's coming from within the Trump administration. People with access to intelligence information have told me that clearly there's new intelligence that China is working on biological weapons designed to attack specific populations, such as ethnic minorities, like the Uyghurs in Western China, like the Tibetans, perhaps others. And this is really scary stuff. Of course, the Chinese have covered up and denied they're doing offensive biological weapons, but it's just been in the past 2 years that the Trump administration, in the form of the annual Arms Control Compliance Report, has said that we have new fears and new concerns about China's covert biological weapons development program.
Hold it. You're making my head blow up. You're making my head blow up. All this stuff we're hearing in the mainstream media and all this talk and all this happy talk we're going back and forth is do they did they have any involvement in these Wuhan labs with what's accepted under the treaty to look for vaccines and other types of prophylactics and therapeutics and things that can protect people if something breaks out among these populations, and to have some sort of maybe defensive program in case something inadvertently comes out. Even the indication or implication that they would have any offensive program. Why is this not on fire in the U.S. Senate? Why is this not on fire in the mainstream media? Because this gets to the heart of it. How can this possibly be? So give us the details of the story, because I think people are going to sit there and go, what do you mean offensive biological weapons program? Right? This is what, General Spaulding, and I know Media Matters are going to be all over this, but hey, guess what? You've been dead wrong. You and Mediaite, these other guys who follow us, we never punch down. But you've been wrong. You had Gertz on the first show. You said, oh, he's a nutcase. His hair's on fire. Guess what? Everything Gertz said is true, and directionally, it's all true. And you see the intelligence reports. Sharri Markson, she broke the dossier story of the Five Eyes intelligence guys looking at this. It's all heading in that direction. But Gertz, you got to help me out here. They signed this treaty back in 1984. The only way that the French in this consortium allowed them to build these P4 labs is that they had to have absolute bulletproof to not be outside anything on these treaties. To know that the National Institute of Health, Tony Fauci, is funding this Echo Alliance and the University of Galveston, and all these guys in their arrogance are dancing around. They got the Bat Lady. The Bat Lady's got more. She's got more money from the U.S. government than some poor professor at Virginia Tech, right? How can you even implicate that there's an offensive weapons program inside the Chinese Communist Party's PLA?
Yeah, this is really significant, and the most significant aspect of this. First of all, the Chinese do not distinguish between civilian and military research.
Amen.
And their military has identified biological as a new domain of warfare. It's in their military writings. They openly speak about developing ethnic weapons. This is not simply something that is being conjured up by officials in the Trump administration. This is a real threat, and it's a real danger. And this is going to be another unwelcome disclosure to the American scientific community, which again has been closely aligned with the Chinese. And we don't know if the Wuhan Institute of Virology is linked to their biological weapons program. I'm told that it is. We haven't seen any evidence. That laboratory's been shut down publicly in order to prevent any kind of inquiry. This needs to be a key element of whatever investigation is done to get to the root of the outbreak of this pandemic. And I'm convinced that it will show that there was clearly a dual-use civilian, military, biological component to the work that was being undertaken at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Before we give U.S. taxpayer dollars to support this international research, please tell me, isn't there some checklist that people have to go through to make sure that everything is within the bounds of the treaties they've signed given biological weapons? How can we even be talking about this? There's got to be some tight checklist that the military, DOD, the intelligence agencies go through before you send a nickel over there for these experiments. Does that exist? And are our scientists outside of that?
No. The only mechanism under the Biological Weapons Convention to which China's a party is that they must submit annual confidence-building measures. And I reported in my Washington Times column last week that China missed the deadline last month for submitting its confidence-building report. Now, this is something that they have to explain what research is being done at what laboratories that has, again, this dual-use capability, that it may be working on vaccines, but it also could be used to build biological weapons. So they have not disclosed the type of work that they're doing on the military side. And this is par for the course. The Chinese have a much secrecy surrounding all aspects of their military program. But their military writings are plain. The science of military strategy has stated clearly that the threats in the future are going to include ethnic targeting biological weapons.
Bill Gertz. Bill, what's your Twitter handle and how do people get access to your writings?
It's at Bill Gertz, and it's thegertzfile.com. It's my website where you can see all my stories.
Lead investigative reporter of the Washington Times. Thank you, sir. Bill Gertz, an American hero, American patriot. Where's CARE? Where's CARE talking about about the Uyghurs? Where's the Gulf Emirates? Where are the guys whining all the time about the Raheem Kassams and the Steve Bannons and the Frank Gaffneys and all these guys, such bad guys about radical Islamic jihad? You have the Uyghurs are targeted now. First of all, they're in concentration camps. Number two, now they're targeted by biological weapons. Okay, folks, it's very simple. You're not having Ramadan. You're not able to do Passover. You can't celebrate the risen Christ in a church. You know why? Because of the biological weapons that they're working on over in China. Okay, they say it's defensive, and this is what leaked out of Wuhan. As sure as the turning of the earth, that's going to be proven. Okay, and what is the United States and the world community going to do about it? We got the Henry Jackson Society, old-time Cold Warriors, next.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back. Friday, May the 15th, the year of our Lord 2020. You're in the War Room. Jack Maxey, Jason Miller, Stephen K. Bannon, Raheem Kassam, and now joined by Dr. Alan Mendoza, the Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society, a think tank in London. Full disclosure, where I used to work an odd decade ago. Dr. Mendoza knows all the trials and tribulations of trying to manage me. Alan, I saw yesterday the Henry Jackson Society pop this incredible new report breaking the China supply chain, how the Five Eyes couple from strategic dependency. Now, our audience is pretty clued up on all of this, but just as an introduction, Dr. Mendoza, why don't you introduce just very quickly the concept of Five Eyes and why particularly Five Eyes as it pertains to breaking the China supply chain and the strategic dependency rather than one of these other multilateral organizations that we hear so much of?
Well, good questions, Raheem, and a pleasure to be with you. And yes, you're always quite a handful to manage. Let's look at the concept firstly. The Five Eyes is, of course, an intelligence partnership. It trades intelligence data between 5 different powers. That's the USA, the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. It's been going for many, many years. It started off as a UK-US thing and expanded beyond there. And it's, of course, a very key intelligence relationship because it enables our powers to share intelligence that each of them picks up, which might be of use to each other. So it's a way of, if you like, pooling our knowledge and being a force multiplier for each of the countries. Now, you may argue, what would one particular country do compared to the US? Actually, I think the US would be the first to acknowledge that actually it's a very useful intelligence alliance. Now, why did we choose this as the basis for where to go? Well, part of it is because we're based in Britain, and of course, we are Brexiting from the European Union. We have Brexited, although we're still in the transition phase. And for us, it's an interesting opportunity to look at some of our other relations in the world, and some of the other partnerships that may have been second fiddle during EU times, but which we now want to restore to the first order. Now that we're in the Brexit phase. And the Five Eyes obviously has a particular impact at the moment because of the whole Huawei issue, because we have, of course, especially in British politics and other countries have a similar discussion point about whether you should allow a company like Huawei into your critical network infrastructure. That links into the intelligence relationship. We've seen some to and fro between the US and UK on that. But we felt it was a helpful and useful starting point. We're not, by the way, excluding anyone else, but we think it's a great starting point to look at our 5 countries bonded by this intelligence partnership.
Dr. Mendoza, your report talks about the new aggressive nature of where the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is positioning itself as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. We've seen Larry Summers in the Financial Times today talking about how this is the end, effectively, of the Western century. How we're now pivoting towards an Asian century. Can you talk to us a little bit about the aggressive nature that you discuss in the report and what exactly the strategic industries that you talk about are. What is a strategic industry, and how are the Chinese becoming aggressive in those areas?
Well, it's a very good question, of course. Now, in a sense, we're talking about the Asian century because, of course, the rise of certain Asian countries in the global systems, of course, something that we can all see is a very different place, the world in 2020, to what it was even in 1990. So we obviously understand that there are changes happening, but it's the nature of those changes and the country really driving that change, which is China, of course, that is concerning. Because unlike previous, if you like, disruptors to the global trading system, Japan was a good example of the 1980s. If you cast your mind back to the 80s, and I'm sure some of your colleagues will know this, there was a huge concern about Japan, but the concern was never about Japan's values or about Japan's fundamental support for the same democratic ideals that we have in the West, because, of course, Japan is a liberal democracy as well. So what we now face, of course, for the first time in many, many years, is a challenge to, if you like, the global system, the global order, by a country, China, which is a very different values system to ours. Equally, when you look to Japan, Japan was not trying to exert, if you like, global power in the way that China's been doing. We see in its neighborhood China is aggressive. It seeks land from them. It seeks to subsume some of them, whether that is Hong Kong away from its two systems, rule into a one-system state, whether it is Taiwan, which of course it regards as not being an independent nation in terms of its approach to the world, or whether it is seaborne disputes. China is being, of course, very, very aggressive in its approaches in different places. And what that means is that we have a strategic competitor. Yes, it's a trading partner. By the way, we used to trade with the Soviet Union back in the days when it was also a strategic competitor. But we always noted and knew that the Soviet Union did not have the same strategic interests as ours. And in fact, it was working to try and undermine what we were doing to promote what it was doing. Now, in a normal trading environment, we all know that countries cut corners. That happens. But again, there's a difference between what China's overall aim is and what democratic countries may do with one another. We're not looking to kneecap each other. If you look at some of China's behavior.
But Dr. Mendoza, aren't they at a hot information and economic war? Your analysis is terrific, and you see today the Commerce Department is taking on Huawei with components. But shouldn't we be more? How do you trade with somebody they're at a hot economic war with us, and a hot information war with us, and a hot cyber war with us? Yeah. How do we sit here? Your paper's great, but are we on offense enough? How do we trade even with these guys? They've decoupled from us. They told us in the spring of 2019 they're coming up to all these different they're going to decouple from the West technologically because they say, hey, we can't be beholden to guys like Trump, and we can't be beholden to to Microsoft and to Google. We're going to do our own. We're going to start. We've stolen enough Western technology. We've done enough forced technology transfers. We've got enough capital. We know these guys, Cisco and all these guys, build our firewall. We'll just steal all their stuff. We'll have our own technological. I like your paper. But shouldn't we be more aggressive on offense?
Well, you can be aggressive on offense, but you've got to start somewhere. The whole point is, at the moment, what we have done is opened up our doors completely to China, with a couple of exceptions, small exceptions. And as a result, we're not even engaged in the so-called free trade that people have been suggesting we have been for the last decade. The reality is that even before you get into the hot war stuff, China's been cheating on the free trade stuff. It's not a free market internally in China. We're fighting, our companies in the West are fighting against Chinese companies that are state subsidies, that are state owned.
Just had a hard drop. I want to continue on with Dr. Mendoza in this report. And here's the reason we want to have Dr. Mendoza on today. The report was very timely because you see, when things move, there's stuff behind the scenes and thinking that converges. The Henry Jackson Society is named after an American, Scoop Jackson. Mm-hmm. Why? He was one of those anti-communist Democrats, okay? And he was a cold warrior. He was one of the guys that kept saying the entire time, we shouldn't have rapprochement, we shouldn't have solved. He was a guy that really was very Reagan-esque in that, hey, this is a absolute existential threat to the West. And what we're seeing and what you're seeing coming up is this is the unfinished work of the 20th century. We didn't have a short 20th century. It didn't end with the Berlin Wall coming down. Fukuyama and the guys at Stanford were wrong. It wasn't the end of history. It's not the end of history. In fact, it's a cyclical history. We're now in a fourth turning. We have not finished the work of the 20th century, and that's because these atheistic, materialistic communists are absolutely adamantly juxtaposed and opposed to everything. We got Dr. Mendoza back.
We have Dr. Mendoza back. And Steve, you make a great point, and you took the words out of my mouth, even though when I'm talking to a fellow Brit, I'm a little bit more bashful about the way I present the questions. But Alan, that brings us on to the point that you raise in your report as well. Now, we'll talk about the strategic areas of dependency that you raise in your report. I also want to get into the polling and the public perception as well, because I think those are interesting. You have to have the people in the back of you to make this happen too. And we've noted from all of the great revolutions that have been taking place that it's the people, right? You mentioned Brexit earlier. It's the people that are going to do this. But I want to bring up this particular point, Steve, and see if this resonates with you as well. You say on page 34 of the report, even Adam Smith, the father of free trade, made it clear that it was undesirable for a country to be dependent on its neighbors for military equipment, lest it become unable to protect itself due to reliance on foreign supplies. He wrote, "It is of importance that the kingdom depend as little as possible upon its neighbors for the manufacturers necessary for defense." Alan, these strategic areas you talk about, these are core critical areas of defense, are they not? This is not just about trade. This is about security, big time.
Absolutely, and you've correctly identified that the father of free trade himself recognised that there are limits to the process and that a country cannot lay itself completely to another country, even one, ironically, that could be an ally, because there are certain things you have to keep at home. If you look at what critical infrastructure is, there are sort of 5 big areas: communications, energy, healthcare and public health, transportation systems, and water. If you start farming off bits of those, or indeed the entirety of those, to another country, you're essentially ceding control over a key critical national security component to somebody else. Now, that somebody else might be a friend today, but what if tomorrow there is an argument between your country and their country? What happens there? What if they turn around to you and say, well, we'll shut off your communications then, we'll shut off your energy, we will do X, Y, and Z? You have no recourse to defending your own people at that moment in time. That's something that Adam Smith was familiar with. We think that's something that everyone today needs to remember and be familiar with when they look at this relationship with China.
Dr. Mendoza, I want to thank you for how do people get access? We've got it up. We've got a link to the site. How do people get access to your Twitter feed and to the Henry Jackson Society website? We put it up. I don't want to have if people want to go directly there, how do they go there?
Very simple. It's www.henryjacksonsociety.org. That's the website. And the Twitter feed is @HJS_org. And you'll see all sorts of interesting bits to do with the paper and some of the polling there as well.
You guys are amazing. Scoop Jackson was a great American patriot and also believed in the alliance, believed in the Judeo-Christian West. And you guys should be very proud. You're carrying on his work every day. Dr. Alan Mendoza, the executive director of the Henry Jackson Society in London. Thank you, sir. The one thing I want to bring about Adam Smith, and this is for all the Cato guys. Not only Adam Smith say you can't be beholden to your neighbors, to your neighbors in defense. He also said the system doesn't work. Well, one of the trading partners is a total mercantilist and a total mercantilist power. How did that get lost on AEI and Cato and everybody over the last 20 or 30 years? Right. All these apostles of free trade. When Trump first came on the scene and we started doing the populist economic nationalist thing, the blowback in the conservative movement was unbelievable. Oh, you guys are, you're industrial policy guys. You're picking winners and losers. And we're saying that you've got to be free trade. Free trade, I said it years ago, it's a fetish, okay? It was not it's a dangerous policy. Because when you're against a totalitarian dictatorship that's a mercantilist power, what happens? Like in health security, you find out now you don't have PPE, you don't have personal protective equipment, right? And so the troops in this regard, the people crossing the beach at Normandy, the ventilator operators, the doctors, the nurses, the people taking the testing, guess what? They're the casualties because China, your enemy, has the PPE. They sucked it all up, and then they're going to sit there and go, "Hey, if you want to kowtow to us, we're going to bleed some of this stuff out."
So one of the reasons I wanted to is in about a quarter of the categories of goods for all of the Five Eyes nations mentioned have critical national infrastructure implications. And Australia is dependent on China for 590 495 categories, New Zealand for 513, the US for 424, Canada for 367, and the UK for 229. And again, a quarter of those in each have critical national infrastructure implications.
When you're sitting at home with no job and no pension fund and no football and no Ramadan, Passover, and church, this is the reason. Back with Front National in a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room. Hashtag War Room Pandemic on Twitter, and I even jumped into the YouTube live chat this morning. You can get to everything at warroom.org, and make sure you're signed up to the newsletter, warroom.org/newsletter. Jack Maxey, Jason Miller, Stephen K. Bannon, Raheem Kassam, and now Jerome Riviere, member of the European Parliament for the National Rally from France.
Is that the old National Front?
The Front National.
Front Nationals, that's my deal. What I know the name changed. I'm sure it's working as a rebranding, but I kind of like the way
it is working.
I like it. I like the way Front National rolls off the tongue.
Jerome, you're a committee member on some pretty top level assignments here: industry, security, defense, foreign affairs. So we wanted to get you on the show, especially given France's stated role in this whole thing. The Wuhan lab, Emmanuel Macron's a drastic decline in popularity over the last couple of weeks. Just when you thought he couldn't get less popular, Emmanuel Macron manages to make it happen again. Jerome, walk us through right now. What are the key concerns for you on the security side of this thing? Because the French, we know, have been all tied up with what's taking place and where in the area, in the region where this virus came from. And number two, for the French people, why is Emmanuel Macron tanking?
Yeah, thank you, Raheem. It's good to be on the show with you because it is a global pandemic, so all countries are affected. Sadly, at this time, it shows that the ideas that the Front National and now today the National Rally have been advocating are ideas that make sense. It's basically what President Trump has done in the United States. We believe that nation states are the only structure that can protect the population, and nation states are the structure in which we can have safe havens. This crisis is demonstrating that the European Union is inefficient. We are right now with the French delegation. We're working on a black book of the European institution, because not only on subject on which they should have been able to do some things, they did not do it in proper time, following the health organization. That was following China. We know that now. So EU was extremely slow, and on subjects where they should not have taken any part, they slowed the response of the nation. And you can see nowadays that in Italy, EU is very unpopular. In France, EU is even more unpopular, and all this is linked to this crisis. Talking about China specifically, as you said, we are quite in a specific position in France. And you find some usual suspects. In 2004, when the first deal was signed between China and France, the foreign minister at the time was Barnier, who is the guy in charge of negotiating the Brexit for EU. So all the same players of this vast system that had a single idea to make a global world, to make all borders disappear, to enforce massive immigration, are tied up in this terrible pandemic. And a couple of days ago, I was attending a foreign affairs committee, in which the High Representative, Joseph Borrell, who is the High Representative for Foreign Affairs at the EU level, was acknowledging the fact that China was trying to influence some decision made by the European Union, but still was minimizing this influence. When you remember all the fuss that is done about foreign influence, we should be extremely worried about what China is doing right now in all European countries in order to minimize their responsibility in this crisis and to maximize the profit they're trying to achieve from the crisis nowadays. So it is a specific thing that we have to tackle. And we want to investigate more into what happened in 2004, because when the visit was made to discuss the first deal with between France and China, all the services gave a negative advice, telling President Chirac that they should not go through because there were too many uncertainties. And the politician at the time decided that they should go through. We need to understand more. And I see as a prime responsible the prime minister of the time, who is Jean-Pierre Raffarin. Jean-Pierre Raffarin was the prime minister, and now he has known ties with China. He has been sent by Macron several times in China to discuss with them. His personal implication with China need to be investigated, because he's the one at the time that made that deal possible, like against every single 100%. Opinion of security agencies in France.
Jerome, we got about a minute left, but here's, the people in the United States, and particularly Trump supporters, and even the Democrats, the economic nationalists that listen to this show, we get upset when Macron lectures us all the time about the benefits of globalization. The Economist this week, I think, is maybe even thrown in the towel. They're saying, I think in their cover story, is it the end of globalism? Just very quickly, in a minute, talk to the American people about where does Macron sit with the French people now about how he's handled this pandemic?
Macron is at his lowest right now. You have to understand that he refused to close our borders all the way through. He refused. For the longest time, you could come from Spain and be treated in a hospital in the southwest of France, when at the same time French people could not go to Spain. Same thing with Italy. Same thing with Belgium. He's such an advocate of free borders that he put the health of the French citizen in danger. You have to know, but per 100,000 inhabitants, France casualties are 40 deaths for 100,000 French, when it is 25 deaths for 100,000 Americans. So the numbers have to be looked proportionally, and France is a disaster.
Jerome, Jerome, do you have a Twitter feed? How do people get more access to you?
Yes, Twitter feed is at Jerome_Riviere.
We'll have it linked up on the site. I want to thank you for taking time away today to join us on War Pandemic. This is one of the Jerome is one of the rising stars of the nationalist movement in Europe, and I'm telling you, they've got a great future ahead of him. We're going to pivot in the next, talking about the supply chain, talking about this tectonic plate shift. What is happening behind the scenes? You can see the spirit of the West start to come to the forefront. Next segment, Rosemary Gibson, who we had on, I think, the first or second show, the President of the United States this weekend. It's been leaked to CNBC by administration officials. He is contemplating signing an important, a landmark executive order of Buy American, Hire American to bring, guess what, the supply chain of drugs back to the United States of America. Rosemary Gibson next on War Room Pandemic.